Josh Frydenberg, welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you, Patricia.
The United States has refused to recommit to the Paris climate change agreement, saying it will make a decision next week. Are you concerned by this?
Look, what the United States does in relation to its domestic climate change policy is a matter for the Trump administration. All I can say is that we in Australia have committed to a 26 to 28% reduction in our emissions by 2030 on 2005 levels. We're on target to meet that, and we'll continue to take all the domestic measures necessarily to stay true to the Paris Agreement.
President Trump has told multiple people, including EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, that he plans to leave the Paris Agreement. This is now being reported. This is not just speculation, but reportage. Does this undermine the international agreement, though? You say, you know, it's their domestic decision, but ultimately this is an international agreement. The United States is a pretty significant part of that agreement. Surely it makes that international agreement weaker.
Well, there was a record number of countries that signed up and now ratified the Paris Agreement. Indeed, more than 140 countries have ratified Paris in record time. Now, this represents all the major economies and the major emitters, and the United States is one of them. But from Australia's perspective, we recognise that we need to do our part, but to do so in a way that doesn't compromise energy security and affordability. Let's just see what the Trump administration decides in relation to its Paris commitments. I do point out, though, that the emissions intensity of the American economy is transitioning downwards in the sense that it's its lowest level in 25 years, which is a pretty significant achievement too.
Are you suggesting then that it doesn't matter if it doesn't ratify or if it pulls out because, you know, it's moving in this direction anyway, so it's meaningless?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the United States is a major player in all manner of international agreements, and Australia's closest friend in terms of our international strategic engagement, and indeed we have a very strong economic relationship too. But Australia announced that we would ratify the Paris Agreement just the day after the Trump administration was elected. We take those agreements and those commitments seriously, and we're making very good progress in meeting them.
Okay, you mentioned there that we're very strong allies, and of course we are. All Australians know it. It's an essential part of our policy and identity. Will Australia be putting any pressure in that context on the US to stay in? I mean, the President says it's a week away till a final decision is made. Surely that gives us a bit of time to put on sort of some lobbying in relation to this. Surely we want the US to stay in, and surely we'll be putting some pressure on for them to stay in.
Well, the position of the Turnbull government has been consistent and clear on this matter, which is those issues about domestic commitments are ones for the Trump administration to take, free from Australia's advocacy or influence. Indeed, you know, we would hope that other countries would say the same about Australia's own commitments. And so what the Trump administration does in relation to Paris is a matter for them, and what Australia does is a matter for us. And I can reiterate how seriously we take our Paris commitments, and just as we beat our first Kyoto target, we're on track to beat our 2020 target by 224 million tonnes of abatement. We will also meet our 2030 target, and that's why we have a significant number of policies in place.
Wouldn't it be a significant blow to the Paris International Agreement?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on an announcement that has not come from the Trump administration. It's pure speculation at this point, other than to say...
but if it is to happen, is it a blow?
We're focused on it.
But look, if it does happen, is it a blow?
Well, I know you'd love me to hypothecate on a hypothetical, and I just won't. I'm just going to leave those decisions and those announcements to the Trump administration. From Australia's perspective, We have set our commitments, we're on track to meet them, and through the Emissions Reduction Fund, from the National Energy Productivity Plan, through the Renewable Energy Target and a range of measures, we are reducing our emissions to the point where the Australian economy, on a per capita and a GDP basis, is at its lowest emissions intensity in 27 years.
The new boss of the Australian Energy Market Commission has said an emissions intensity scheme is the most effective policy for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. Anne Pearson, who's become the chief executive of that body, has made that comment. Given all of that, is that still on the table? Is that something that you're willing to consider? Because there's a pretty influential voices saying this is the best way forward.
Well, a couple of things. First is we have the Finkel review, which is coming out to COAG leaders meeting on June the 9th, and that will obviously be a significant document, and Australia's chief scientist has undertaken a lot of work to come up with solutions for ensuring more stability into our energy system. So let's just wait and see what he says. As for the Australian Energy Market Commission, those comments that the CEO was referring to relate to a piece of modelling that they did on 3 specific proposals. One was an emissions intensity scheme, one was a forced closure of coal-fired power stations, and the other was an extension of the renewable energy target beyond 2020. They didn't model other schemes, they just modelled those 3, and the assumptions in some of that modelling were based on very cheap and available gas. Now, we know that even since that modelling was undertaken, gas prices have risen significantly and do represent a major impediment to lower electricity prices. So I would just say caution, wait for Finkel. We recognise that there is a lot of ideas out there, and then the government will come to its own solutions in its own time.
All right, you mentioned Finkel. That was my the next area I was going to. We've seen you make changes as a government to areas such as education, to health, and also this Medicare levy, a real repositioning by the government on crucial policy areas. Are you prepared to move to the centre and create a real repositioning around the environment and energy in the Finkel context?
Well, let's wait and see what the chief scientist recommends.
But broadly, I'm asking a political question.
Well, the answer is we will do what is best for Australia to meet its trilemma. And that trilemma is energy security, energy affordability, as we transition to a lower emissions future. And it's fair to say, Patricia, that we are in a new world when it comes to energy policy, because we're seeing the most significant transition or transformation in more than a century. In Australia, we've traditionally relied on baseload power generation from coal and a little bit of gas. It's always been provided in a centralised system where people are reliant on the grid. Today, we have the highest number of households that rely on solar panels on their rooftops and solar hot water systems anywhere in the world, with 15%. So people are decentralised, and we're seeing a greater penetration of renewables, now 16%, and in some states like South Australia, it's at 47% of their power coming from wind and solar, and that's had terrible results and impacts on business and on households. So we have to stabilise the system. That's what Finkel is going to be recommending. We have to deal with the high gas prices, and that's why the Prime Minister's taken the unprecedented step of announcing export controls on gas, and that's why we have to put consumers first, and that's why I've called upon the states to abolish the limited merits review to rein in the network costs.
Just want to move to Queensland Cabinet's decision. It's agreed Adani will pay full royalties for the Carmichael coal mine in central Queensland, so there'll be no royalty holiday for the Adani Carmichael mine. Will it fall over?
Well, let's just wait and see what the Adani owners and proponents do. But obviously the government's position has, again, been quite clear. We have said that once all the environmental approvals are in at federal and state level, with the required offsets and other strict conditions attached, that we want to see this project go ahead. In Townsville, there is unemployment at around 11%. This mine will create up to 4,000 direct jobs.
Sure, we know
and
all
up to
those facts,
8,000
but
indirect jobs.
But every day there's new
You've asked
news.
me,
This
does
one on the
go ahead?
royalty. Well, you know, ultimately we're seeing these decisions being made. Are you concerned now that this is becoming unsustainable? That this is basically the business case for this mine is falling over?
Well, that's speculation, and that's not based on any evidence that I have had before me or that I've been told by the company itself. As I understand it, they are obviously very concerned about some of the delays that they've had, and they've been outspoken about that. But they know where the federal government stands. They're not sure where Bill Shorten stands because he's been very wishy-washy. On the one hand, he goes to Rockhampton and he said he's all in favour of apprentices.
I'll put that to Tony Burke.
But he doesn't.
I'll put that to
good.
I'll put that to Tony Burke in a moment. I don't want to focus too much on Labor. Just a final question, because we're running out of time on this Indigenous recognition process and this Uluru meeting. We now have pretty firm ideas of what the Indigenous community wants, including having in the nation's founding document basically an enshrined representative body. Is that something that the Liberal Party will consider?
Well, as the Prime Minister said when this was first announced, the public are inherently cautious and conservative when it comes to constitutional change, and we've seen only 8 out of 44 referendums being successful, because you need that double majority, as you're aware, majority of voters and a majority of states. Now, the Referendum Council will be reporting to both the Prime Minister and to Bill Shorten on the 30th of June, and I think everyone would be wise to withhold judgment until then. But as for the 67 referendum, that was incredibly important and inspired people like Neville Bonner into politics. Today we've got a new set of Indigenous leaders in the Parliament, led by my good friend Ken Wyatt, and I think, you know, there's a lot to be excited about in terms of the improvements we're making around Indigenous education and Indigenous health, infant mortality rates, and of course Indigenous business opportunities. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I'll leave those big decisions about where we go from here to the Prime Minister and to the Leader of the Opposition, because I would hope that on matters like this we can reach a bipartisan agreement as they did back in '67.
Josh Frydenberg, many thanks for your time.
Good to be with you.